Welcome, gun runner.
The glory days of the video game arcade might be a long way behind us, sadly, but they certainly haven't been forgotten, and in this video I'm going to take you back over 35 years to those heady days that played such an important part in our youth. The year is 1985 and we're all present at one of the greatest times in coin-op video gaming history. You won't find any fruit machines, penny pushers or fixed prize machines here. These are the true arcade classics that lit up dingy smoke-filled rooms, sat on stained carpets whilst they delighted audiences and drained our pockets of all our spare change. Names like Sega, Konami, Capcom, Taito and Atari have become synonymous with gaming, and so it'll be no surprise to see them feature heavily in this video. This is where many of today's popular franchises started, multiple innovations took place, and the genres that we know and love today were formed. All of these titles play every bit as well today as they did back then, and deserve to be remembered as true classics in the annals of video game history. As the industry recovered from the coin-op crash of 1983, one thing became clear. The number of companies still manufacturing arcade games had become a lot slimmer. In fact, you'll notice that the top titles of 1985 are almost exclusively dominated by just 4 companies. Something I really haven't noticed with any other year that I've covered. But despite a distinct lack of variation in the teams delivering these games, there were a surprising amount of all-time classics developed in this period, as you'll soon see as we look back at the 20 greatest arcade games of 1985. Nichibutsu's Galivan was originally based on a popular Japanese TV series called Space Sheriff Gavan. In essence, it's a run and gun style game that is quite similar in some ways to both Data East Robocop and Sega's eSWAT arcade games. More so the latter due to them sharing a key mechanic. You start off as a pretty feeble cop who can only kick and punch, but the upgrades come thick and fast. By grabbing power-ups you can utilise different types of weapons that cause more and more damage and improve your armour, but you'll have to collect power pyramids to keep them charged up. Konami's Ping Pong was the natural evolution of one of the very first video games in existence, Atari's seminal classic Pong. The main game is pretty much exactly the same as Pong in fact, just hit the ball back and forth, try to score more points than your opponent and ultimately win the game. However, Konami's execution of the tabletop sport features a much improved 3D perspective for added realism. There are no players shown here though, the paddles just float in the air at each end, seemingly connected to the hands of ghostly apparitions. The roaring crowd don't really seem to be scared however. Developed by arcade shoot-'em-up legends Toa Plan, but manufactured and distributed worldwide by Taito, Tiger Heli is credited as being the very first game of its type to feature a mega bomb, something that very much became a staple of the genre for years to come. Using a vertical orientation, it's also unusual in that you control an attack chopper rather than the usual jet fighter or spaceship. Another interesting fact to note is that all the enemies are ground-based, which you definitely wouldn't expect. Tiger Heli is a very original, very underrated and very playable shooter. Released at a time when the Laserdisc craze started by Dragon's Lair had very much died out, Data East's Road Blaster was not very popular at the time, which is a shame because its gameplay was very different to its contemporaries. But the game finally got the success it deserved as it became one of the first games to be released for Sega's Mega CD add-on, where it was known under the title Road Avenger, to avoid obvious confusion with the Atari coin-op, and was even bundled with the unit for a short while. Although a driving game in essence, it still relies on quick reflexes to control all the action. An attractive adventure-style platformer, Peter Pack-Rat was never the success for Atari that it deserved to be. I think this is because it was the type of game that was more commonly found on the home systems of the time, rather than in the arcades, so it didn't really stand out from the crowd. You have to guide Peter around one of each of the 3 stages, Junkyard, Sewer and Forest, trying to find a number of lost items. Once you've recovered all the items and stowed them in your backpack, you must return to the start of the level to complete it. You avoid and take out enemies along the way in traditional style. Also known under the title Russian Attack, Green Beret is rather infamous for being one of Konami's most challenging games. It wouldn't be unfair to describe this game as Ghosts and Goblins military, as you become a one-man army trying to infiltrate an enemy base and save a bunch of POWs. Your only weapon at the start is a knife, so your attacks have to be timed perfectly. Enemies come at you relentlessly, so when you do finally grab a gun, it's a very welcome relief indeed. You can also climb ladders to get to higher platforms, and this is a good way to avoid the endlessly spawning enemies. Terraced is the sequel to the hugely influential Nichibutsu coin-op Mooncrester. Whereas the first game is very much a space-based affair, the follow-up takes you down to a planet's surface for the shoot-'em-up action. The key gimmick of the original game was the way you added 2 extra sections onto your ship for increased firepower, and that special ability is back here too. Now you have to locate these pieces rather than being awarded to you for progression. There is also a new ability that can be activated once you have them all, called Transform, that lets you split into 3. Originally developed by Tatsumi, Buggy Boy was licensed to arcade giants Taito for the West, and was also known as Speed Buggy. The original coin-op actually used 3 screens to portray the action and had a custom cabinet to house them. The idea of Buggy Boy is to drive along a series of courses, going off ramps, collecting bonus flags, avoiding the obstacles, and most importantly of all, completing the course within the time limit. There are a total of 5 different tracks, and these are all selectable from the title screen. Buggy Boy is hugely fun, and a big departure from all the other arcade races of the time. In 1985, Capcom took their already successful arcade game Commando and adapted it into a new game set in the Wild West, and called it Gunsmoke. The formula is exactly the same as Capcom's previous arcade blockbuster: walk up the screen, shooting the bad guys and rescuing the hostages, whilst trying not to get killed yourself. But one very unique aspect of Gunsmoke, however, that very much set it apart from Commando, is the way you always fire 2 guns at once, one in each hand like a real cowboy. But you can only fire these in 3 set directions: straight ahead, left diagonal or right diagonal. When Konami first released Yar Kung Fu into the arcades, it was a huge hit, and is now considered the granddaddy of all modern fighting games. It introduced a selection of different characters and projectile-style weapons and special moves that we are now used to in games like Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat and King of Fighters. In the game, you control a warrior called Oolong who must battle a series of foes to become the martial arts Grandmaster. Moves are performed using a combination of a direction, including diagonals and the fire button, so there are plenty here that you need to master. Hang-On is perhaps most famous for being the very first Sega coin-op to utilise the famous Superscaler hardware. Indeed, this was originally called the Hang-On board. It was also the first Sega arcade game to use a moving hydraulic cabinet, so there's no doubting its historical importance. For those that don't know, this is a motorbike themed racer set over 5 stages, where you must complete each one within the set time limit. The stages merge seemingly though like one long race, with the classic extended play message popping up as you complete a stage by beating the clock. Based on the 1984 film of the same name, the basic idea of the game is to make your way through all 5 levels, collecting the treasures and rescuing the kidnapped children. Various stages vary quite a lot here, from the 3D perspective adventure levels that scroll in all directions to the classic minecart chase that requires quick reactions to progress. Indy is armed with his trusty whip to help him along the way, and handy messages appear at the bottom of the screen to guide you along this. Temple of Doom is a coin-op that stays authentic to the movie whilst offering a varied gameplay experience. Later renamed as Shaolin's Road, probably because Kicker made it sound like a football game, this coin-op was promoted in some markets as the sequel to the legendary Yar Kung Fu. But that's probably a little misleading, as whilst both games feature fighting mechanics, they play very differently. Each level is set either outside or inside a temple as you attempt to literally kick every single enemy off the screen. Enemies spawn from doors around the play area and sometimes leave behind useful power-ups that give you special powers such as limited invincibility or the ability to fire projectiles. Better known to most gamers as Gradius, Nemesis set new standards for horizontally scrolling shoot-em-ups in 1985. As well as garnering great acclaim from the media, it also introduced several new innovations. The most notable of these was the weapon bar power-up system, which would be copied by many games thereafter. When you collect one of these power-ups, it will shift the section cursor along the bar at the bottom of the screen. The player can then select the weapon highlighted if they want to use it. It wasn't a surprise to see the game turn into a franchise, with many sequels soon following. The Empire Strikes Back might be the second film in the original Star Wars trilogy, but it's the third game in the Atari arcade game trilogy. Originally released as an upgrade kit for Star Wars, and then as a standalone game, it has far more in common with the original game than the second. So like Star Wars, ESB is a 3D vector-based game from a first-person perspective that recreates key battles from the movie, including the iconic Battle of Hoth. The main upgrade over Star Wars is the introduction of a Jedi bonus. If the player collects the letters of the word, all enemy shots will be instantly eliminated. Based on the hugely popular home computer game with the same name, the idea of Tropolista is simple. To rescue the hostages trapped in a war zone, you must fly your chopper across the landscape, land where possible to pick up the hostages, and then fly them back to your base. However, the buildings that contain them are protected by both tanks and aircraft, who will try to stop you. Thankfully, you can also shoot at them too, but be careful not to kill any hostages. Unlike the original, levels also take place out at sea and in perilous caverns too, among other places, giving it a lot more variation and challenge. In this famous Capcom arcade game, you take the part of the brave knight Arthur on a mission to save his bride from Satan himself. The game mixes several genres such as run and gun, platformer and arcade adventure to good effect, but this game is most famous for being seriously hard. Your character can only take 2 hits, the first of these knocks off his armour and the second one kills him. You also have a time limit with which to complete each level too, and if you die, which you will with great regularity, it's back to the beginning of the level. It didn't stop the game being a massive hit, however. Paperboy was, and still is, a great example of the originality Atari games consistently delivered during their golden years. In essence, it's a driving game of sorts, but there is much more to it than that. You are the titular Paperboy and must ride your bike along an isometric street delivering papers to your customers, whilst using your spare papers to vandalise the homes of the non-subscribers. These streets are chock full of crazy residents getting in your way, some of which can also be taken out with a swift throw of the rolled up tabloid. Make it to the end of the week and a special bonus stage awaits. Another game that used Sega's revolutionary superscaler hardware to great effect. In Space Harrier, you fly into the action from a third-person 3D style perspective, taking out the aliens, avoiding the scenery, and eventually going up against a giant boss at the end of each level. As well as the enemies, other hazards include trees, rocks and even huge pillars that turn the game into an obstacle course at times. With each level you're taken to a different part of the fantasy zone. Yes, the same place as the game of that title, with new enemies and hazards. Space Harrier is a true arcade legend. Ed Logg's outstanding 4-player arcade experience, Gauntlet is rightly regarded as one of the greatest arcade games of all time, and by far my favourite from this year. In the game you choose one of 4 characters: Thyra the Valkyrie, Thor the Warrior, Merlin the Wizard, or Quest the Elf, as they battle their way through near endless array of ever-challenging dungeons, killing the ghosts, demons, lobbers, grunts and sorcerers, amongst other enemies. Join 3 friends as you grab keys to open doors, gather much needed food, collect the treasure, and use magical potions on your way to the heavily guarded exit. And that rounds up my look at the greatest arcade games of 1985. Are there any others that you can think of that should have made the list, or do you disagree with any of the entries that I did include? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Mitchell Valentino, Neptune, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Aussie B, DOS Gamerman and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to a host for extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.